So you're about to see 20 photos, adventures as a photojournalist that most impacted my spiritual life. God did not tell me to go here or there. However, I have an abiding faith and a purpose for my work, which is backed by meditation practice, which I learned in Africa. Okay, this is my home in Northern York County. This is where I come from. And you might say, hey, that's a very idyllic place. Well, it is. Down in the woods on the right is a stream where I did crayfishing and some swimming. And that dead-end dirt road, if you go out the other way, you can go across, I could bike across Yellow Breeches Creek several times. But alas, underneath those trees are 8 different chicken houses with about 8,000 birds. And 6 of those houses needed to be cleaned out, 1 each month. That's shoveling by hand. So you get that picture. My family was Mennonite, but they were not conservative Mennonite. My father was, and unusual for Mennonites at that time, was college educated and a teacher turned agway businessman. My homemaker mother, I'm sure, was the best speller in Munnigan Township. But I went to a very, very conservative Mennonite high school run by the bishops. We had, women had to wear black stockings. I had to let my hair grow long. I couldn't wear my white buck shoes. And there was no drama, no musical instruments. So I was looking for a way away from that conservative religion. And I got my big break when I was a junior in college, and I was accepted at the University of East Africa and went to Nairobi, Kenya. The architecture inset is of the library at our university. I wrote home to Mom and I said, I can't believe this. This is astounding. This is not the Africa that I expected. Kenya was in its 5th year of independence with freedom fighter Jomo Kenyatta as president, taking the podium to whip up the crowds with the shout, Harambee, meaning let's pull together. Finding Africa was an out-of-body spiritual experience. I learned of African women in literacy classes and rural women as members of coffee co-ops. The African plains, too barren for agriculture, but adequate for wildlife, was a sanctuary teeming with weaver birds and lilac-breasted roller birds, often with the background of Mount Kilimanjaro, which I climbed, having an excruciating headache by the time I got to the top, and I wanted to get down as fast as possible. Close to the equator with glaciers, it's not, the glaciers are melting. I don't think you'll see snow like that on the Kilimanjaro for a long time. But this is because of global warming. This is the wildlife that I experienced during those years as a student, as well as when I had some time off. I needed to open up to a wide spectrum of religious beliefs: Muslims, Sikhs, Ismailis, Hindus, as I attended their weddings and conversed with university students. I visited groups that had combined African spirituality with Christianity, yet another view of faith that I needed to consider. When I went back home after my year at the university, I finished at EMC, I took classes at New York University, and it landed up at the Beaumont School for Delinquent Boys in Richmond, Virginia. I did my casework, but on the side, I made photographs. The top left picture was my first publication on PTA magazine cover. So I needed to get away. I really needed to get back to Africa, which we did. And it didn't take me long to have a hairdo like Haile Selassie and the nomadic nomad. I reveled in the different cultures, expanding my views of humanity, God's people. We, that is my wife then, Ruth and I, were asked by the World Council of Churches to document the rebuilding of the Southern Sudan after 17 years of war, when schools, clinics, and churches were in ruin. While Ruth was in Juba at the hotel doing research, I took treks out into the countryside. One of them, we had a full Land Rover rollover with a barrel of diesel fuel in the back. Somehow we all survived. And when we got back to Nairobi, we produced this booklet and a film strip about the Sudan. Crazy, but the Sudan went to war again in just 5 years after we were there, for another 20 years. Can you imagine how scared the children became? Together, 37 years of war, and how set back any health programs for children became in the Sudan. Among many stories I covered alone for magazines, the project of tree planting on hoary hills in northernmost Kenya, where the nomadic Gabra people lacked water. The project, led by Gabra leaders and a Methodist engineer, would collect fog moisture on the trees and send it trickling through the ground to the water pools below. I was sent to Burundi to photograph refugees. To Tanzania to photograph Burundi refugees. I have learned that bag the girls is using on the left-hand side was made by Mennonites in Akron, Pennsylvania, and set around the world. The picture on the right I made while I was developing a Swahili literature book using 100 photographs. Left is a Samburu nomadic woman, and the right is Rwandese mother and child that I photographed while I was making pictures of refugees in Uganda for the All Africa Conference of Churches, All Africa Conference of Churches. Well, houses. Does it really take 5 rooms and a mansion to live well? Ruth and I had other assignments in Ghana and West Africa where there were health programs for babies, for mothers and babies. And also we got to see another culture and another way to construct homes. This portrait of the family, 3 sons, I believe, with their wives and children, all live in one large compound. I reached the summit of about 17,000 feet, Point Lenana, 3 times, where the vista of the valleys of ridges and peaks reached many miles. Mount Kenya is a water source for bountiful farms below. Without seasonal melting, the glaciers, these farms will be threatened. I look happy there. I'm just seeing now. Well, I made it to the top. Ruth and I made two major trips when we were in Africa. One was from Nairobi to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And the other was to South Africa. Ruth's sister, Esther, and her husband, Paul, went with us to Ethiopia. And this is our baby, Charmaine, who traveled with us on both of those trips. In Addis, I made street photos, including the wedding of an Orthodox Christian church. And then I also went on the top of a Land Rover on a mobile health trip. In Africa, of great contrasts. The other trip was to South Africa, 10,500 miles in 3 months through 9 countries. I treasure this photo from South Africa, which shows a traditional woman and city woman waiting for a bus from Lesotho. And we made it to the Cape of Good Hope, where we turned around and went back by way of Lesotho and Swaziland, Botswana, and Zambia, back to Nairobi. And wasn't I amazed years later, back in the US, when I photographed Mandela, former President de Klerk, and President Clinton in Philadelphia. De Klerk and Mandela were receiving the Peace Medal. A nonviolent revolution had taken place in South Africa thanks to Mandela's wisdom and incredible work. If you want to lose all your headaches, go on Africa's wildlife plains. Creation is big, opening your heart, and you are small. Maasai, in this photo, actually this painting by my friend Karen Weber from several of my photographs. The Maasai are looking at the chrome, using it as a mirror. Ruth is at the stove. And as I said, none of this would be possible without her. Elephant in Samburu Reserve. And now we make a huge transition from independent Kenya. We change locations to the Philippines, revolutionary Philippines, with assignments throughout Asia. The change tried my spirit. We traded floral beauties of Kenya for the diesel fumes of Manila. Soon after I arrived in the Philippines, I was asked to, or offered the opportunity to accompany a Cantonese-speaking American living in Hong Kong on a visit to China, not long after China's opening to tourists. My spiritual journey here was to see if maybe Mao's China, which had been showing off its new society in colorful brochures, might be an egalitarian society liberal Christians could aspire to. Well, what I saw was an impoverished country, if void of brothels and extravagant living. The amazing advances China has made in the last 40 years far exceeds any country in Africa or Asia. However, rich and poor have returned to China. But the skyscrapers and amazing changes in China just are mind-boggling. Soon after returning to the Philippines, I was shocked by Catholic religious fervor when the statue of Black Nazarene was taken from the Manila church each year. Each town has its saint statue, which leads parades once a year. All Saints' Day calls Filipinos to their dead ancestors for commemorations, tombs for poor, middle class, and mausoleums for the rich. In poorer cities, including Nairobi, Kenya, and Manila, there are huge areas where homes made of scraps of metal, wood, and cardboard house thousands without sanitation and with water only at central spigots. Yet, I saw an amazing tribute to human ability to survive, maybe thrive, from residents who emerged from these homes, tiny spaces, nicely dressed and healthy. Probably a credit to the volunteer health workers there in Tondo. Have you seen a more healthy child? The stark reality is I saw in Olongapo in the Philippines, where the US had the warship Kitty Hawk docked, and right across the canal were Filipinos digging into the trash to find tin cans to get a little money for food. The cost of the warship, about 187 million when it was built, would be enough, easily enough, the cost of that one warship to feed all hungry Filipinos for many years. US corporations do well in the Philippines and partly backed up by the US military. My religious origins are Anabaptist. My ancestors were drowned, burned at the stake, or otherwise killed because they did not accept the church and state combo. Infant baptism then meant military inscription and subservience to the state. So you can see my thoughts, so you can imagine my thoughts as I photographed Pope John Paul II with the dictators Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. I covered a Pope's visit for my agent, Camera Press, in London. I was shy and didn't go along real well with the other photographers. I found my own places and staked out my own ways of getting intimate pictures. Imelda Marcus did not want the Pope to visit Tondo, the slum area. However, the Pope arranged it anyway. Now look at the crowds on the rooftop with the Pope to the center right. Do you think that would happen today with our security? Somehow I made my way from making photos at the red platform where the Pope spoke, going through the crowds of millions to the rooftop of the hotel to make this photo. Now, at the same time of the Pope's visit, Filipinos above ground and underground were in revolution mode. Priests were disappeared or imprisoned. Many university students had gone to New People's Army in the mountains. It took more than a year for me to arrange a journalist visit to the NPA. I needed to cross many NPA security hurdles. The visit would test my nonviolent morality. At one point, I went with an NPA member to the creek to wash my pants, and I asked him how he joined the NPA. He said he used to be a Christ Crusader at the university, but when he visited the slums for his sociology class, he decided that something needed to be done. And eventually, he decided to join the NPA. During our time there, an NPA young woman was killed by, in our district by the government troops. And this was the memorial that the NPA held for the village that the young girl was from. There were tears, and I said to myself that even revolutionaries can cry. The current government of Duarte, still backed with millions of dollars from the US, has killed more in his war on drugs and the Muslim rebellion in the South than Marcos killed during martial law. Of course, it was a spirited high for me when 4 pages of my Marcos photos appeared in New York Times Magazine. When Mennonites visited us in the Philippines from Laos, they asked us to come to Laos. I did not want to go, but Ruth prevailed, and I was glad she did because publications were eager for stories. Under the communist Pathet Lao government, after the US exit from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, Buddhist schools and practice continued. I was there for the 5th anniversary of the Pathet Lao government. The Lao people were friendly and enjoyed being photographed. A Mennonite and Quaker couple were the only Americans in Laos at that time. They were trying to construct a tractor with armor good enough to explode the tons and tons of unexploded ordnance that the US had dropped on Laos secretly during the Vietnam War. Farmers and children are still exploding some of those ordinances. Over 2,000 Lao have been killed since the war from the enormous number of bombs that the US dropped, cluster bombs on Laos. While in Indochina, UNICEF asked me to photograph Cambodian refugees, mostly women, because the Khmer Rouge had killed so many men. After returning to the US from Asia and becoming a Quaker, my next learning and change of heart came in Israel-Palestine. In 2003, I visited and did a story together with Charmaine, my daughter, a graduate of Earlham College, had lived in Ramallah for a decade then. So I joined her in 2004. Before this, I had witnessed Israel capturing the hostages, rescuing the hostages in Entebbe, Uganda, and I thought very highly of Israel's prowess, military prowess. But now I was experiencing Israel as oppressor with the wall, horrible checkpoints for Palestinians to cross. Here, Charmaine is talking with a farmer who is not able to go to his greenhouses or his fig trees because Israel has built the barrier and taken their land inside the barrier. These weeks, Palestinians are remembering their Nakba, the time in 1948 when Israel blocked the return of Palestinians to their home. Taking Palestinian land continues today. The Dome of the Rock is a remarkable memorial to Muhammad's ascension. Both the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third most sacred site, are on the Temple Mount above the wall of the ancient Jewish temple. Millennia of history in West Bank, Bethlehem, is the Church of the Nativity. I found in the old city, Jerusalem, a kiosk which had Islamic, Christian, and Jewish symbols. What an adjustment it was when we returned here to the US and I started doing work for corporations. And I made 3 shoots a week of stock photos. And I was happy to return to EMC, which was now Eastern Mennonite University, which had become progressive as compared to previously when it was cut off from the outside world. EMU now has one of the best peace building institutes in the country. A lot of my stock photography has been of medical people. And the main emphasis in my stock photography has been photographing people of color. And what better models could I have than of my own family, including my happy granddaughter, Jamila. I made forays into Pennsylvania's wilderness away from my studio and on location corporate work, finding beauty in my own Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had become my country as I crisscrossed it up and down. Florals, You can find creation inside a flower. Amazing, absolutely amazing. This to me is creation, incredible designs. I enjoyed photographing Pennsylvania farms, farm contours from the air. And the first book that I photographed was of Amish. This picture was made into a large print. It's the interior of the Bethel, Mother Bethel AME Church in Society Hill in Philadelphia. This is Philly from the Ben Franklin Bridge. I was hanging over the highway, always trying to get the unusual photograph. And due to lack of confidence, probably, I always exposed more film than I would have needed to. Photography has three joys: making the photograph, finding it. Number two, seeing the results on a computer screen, where I used to get those yellow boxes and couldn't wait to open them. And then enjoying selection of publication on the wall. Hundreds of publications, thousands of published photographs. Writer Ruth Hoover Stites and I published 17 books under the banner of Pennsylvania's natural and cultural heritage. And I photographed another 5 for other publishers. However, in 2003, the book market crashed. And 3 years later, we had to close our business. A difficult and very stressful time for us. I needed a release. Higher power, I believe, knew also that the photo industry was going to take a big fall in the coming years. So good for me to leave it. I went to Pendle Hill Quaker Retreat Center. The insert picture, 2 of my friends, Hal Weaver and Adrian Nyangabo from Burunda. And this is a recent dance that I was at of the dance fusion. During my time at Pendle Hill, I wrote the book, Turn the World Around. And what do I do now? I make photographs for my own pleasure, and a lot of them to give away. It's very nice not to have the financial part. And I have mounted a couple shows. My friend Karima Archie is looking at my publications at the show I had at Goggleworks. I made pictures for Julio Cepeda when he was here from Cuba displaying his incredible artwork. I made pictures of him having lectures at Albright University or college, and I made portraits of him that he could take back home. I enjoy sharing with our Islamic community, who today is, as Al-Sayed mentioned, is observing the end of the Ramadan period. And I made pictures freely for Art Plus Gallery and for Fellowship of Quakers in the Arts, Ross on the left and Johanna on the right. I make family pictures. My son-in-law hand, daddy's hand, Shahada's hand on baby Laith. I make photographs for campaigns. I enjoy sharing photographs with other associates like the Rainbow Coalition here at their rally in Reading. And of course, I'm making pictures to document the lockdown. Here, Judy is having a Zoom birthday, not only with her own people here in Pennsylvania, but also from her family in Utah and California. Many events in Reading before the lockdown, and I hope after. We visited my daughter Renee's family in Costa Rica, a new venue for me and another chance to experience the beauty of creation. On one of our 3 trips, I managed a 1500 millimeter lens for capturing birds. This is the green-eared hummingbird. The blue-crowned motmot, the green-crowned brilliant, the fiery-throated hummingbird, and the rufous-collared sparrow. Of course, my ecstasy is seeing my photographs displayed. Here, 8 12-foot murals of aerial photographs at Geisinger Hospital, at Judy and my friend Michael and Sheffina's house in Arlington, at an engineering firm in Harrisburg. Judy and I did 2 Western adventures last year. First, to celebrate Judy's aunt's 100th birthday. Believe it or not, I made this photograph through the window of a train. It takes a little contrast and sharpening afterwards. This is Bryce Canyon National Park. From the train just after arriving in Washington State. And our friends in Bellingham, the Yoders, took us to Mount Schuchsen in the North Cascades in Washington State. On Aunt Ruth's trip, we traveled into southern Utah to Zion National Park. Also Zion. The right is Spruce National Park, and the left, please notice, Judy's grandson, Ranger, standing real small in a formations that are millennia and millennia and millennia of evolution. Imagine the many millennia to develop these formations long before we Homo sapiens were here. So here in Western US, my mind was stretched and my heart filled with awe, imagining the millions of years of antiquity and the short time that we have been here on Earth. coming to North America about 13 or 12,000 years ago. On these last 3 slides, I would like if we could think about Mother Earth and Homo sapiens, ourselves, in the short time that we've been here, and our relationship to Mother Earth, and what we are leaving for our grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. Thank you much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I like question and answers, so please feel free.
Blair, I have a question.
Sure, I'll say it.
This is incredible, first of all. I mean, more than what I expected. And it's a lot of educational pieces in it as well. So my question is Greg right now was recording this? Because I would like to have, if it was, for my kids to see it, because I think I have a lot of interesting things for them. And I have one of my daughter, excuse me, one of my daughter as well. She interested in photography. She's 33 years old, but her passion all the way it's in photography, and she's working right now. So if that was recorded, that would be wonderful.
And now we can see each other and share our thoughts. Thank you, Blair. Thank you. Bless you.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Those are sensational pictures, of course, of sensational scenes. How much tinkering do you do with these, if any, before we see them?
For most of the pictures, I didn't do any tinkering. My background is photojournalism, and photojournalists don't tinker their pictures. However, when I do landscapes and scenic pictures, I might push the color a little bit, or just make some small improvements. But basically, what you see is what you get. I mean, what you see is what I made at the time of making the picture.
Thank you. That warms my heart.
Oh, thank you. I decided not to. I do some experimental photography. I think there's one in my show at Haverford, but I decided not to show those.
What years were you in the Philippines?
Oh, there we go.
78 to 82.
Hmm.
So that was during the Marcos years,
Yeah.
and they've gone through quite a few governments since then. Marcos was removed from the Philippines, not because of the New People's Army and violence, but because of street demonstrations.
Yeah.
And actually, they've had one government removed since then from street demonstrations.
Street democracy.
Thank you, Blair, for this wonderful presentation. It's just like being able to travel around the world with you and stay in our homes. I have a question about your wife. Was she related to the Quaker Hoovers? And I just am amazed that she would travel with you and contribute so much too. Could you talk a little bit about her?
Oh, sure. She was, when we first went to Kenya, she taught school, but she really wanted to be a writer. And so she joined me as a photographer-writer team. Now, I did writing myself also, but we did a lot of work together. And no, she doesn't come from Quaker background. We were both Mennonites,
Mennonites. Okay,
strong Mennonite backgrounds.
great. Well, she's contributed a lot as well.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I said that I couldn't have done all this without Ruth.
Right, right.
Maybe since she's on here, she should say hi.
Oh, there she is. Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks, Blair.
Isn't perfect.
I put a note in the chat. It's just a delight to go over those years through these images. And of course, I spend a lot of time with those memories myself. And it's rejuvenating. It's to think of the wonderful people we felt life with
Mhm.
over those years in those countries and
Right.
together.
Wonderful.
I could only really touch the surface. And
Yeah,
as you could see.
it's great. It's great though.
I should mention particularly the trip we took with my sister, and then the trip also that I mentioned that Ruth's sister and her husband went with us. They were, I mean, I only showed like 2 photographs of each of the trips, but they were really incredible. And
Blair,
Charmaine was able to travel with us, our child, who
Ruth
was
and Blair,
born in Kenya. Yes.
I'm sorry. I have a question. What motivated the both of you mostly for where you chose to go? Was it assignments? Was it, oh, there's a revolution taking place? You know, what kind of things made you load up your suitcases and head on out?
The reason we went to, maybe Ruth wants to answer this, but the reason we went, I'll just say that the reason we went to the Philippines was that that's where we could get assignments. I wanted to go to Malaysia, and we disliked the Philippines so much that Ruth went over to Malaysia to see if we could possibly move over there. But she found that we would have to get a new visa every 3 months, and that wasn't a very good place to have our 2 children. By then we had 2 children when we were in the Philippines, Renee and Charmaine. Reason we went to Kenya is because I was a student in Kenya, and part of our marriage contract was that we were going back to Kenya. Isn't that right, Ruth?
Amen on both of those. That was it. It was also quite a factor that we could, you know, an English speaking setting, because we didn't invest in learning a language full scale. So, although we took some training in Kiswahili and very little in Tagalog.
Correct.
Blair, as a photographer, I'm curious, how did you start as a photographer? What got you going with taking pictures? How was your beginnings as a photographer?
Well, really, I owe it to Africa, because when I went to Nairobi first as a student, I had no idea that I would become a photographer, but it opened my eyes being there. I mean, I didn't have a family background in photography. Anyone. The one thing I did when I was here, I went to this was after that I decided I wanted to be a photographer. Okay, so it was just going to Kenya, and it opened my eyes, and I learned that I was pretty good at this. And so then when I had the 2 years of casework, when I got stomach ulcers, I just decided I didn't want to be well, I thought I was going to be a psychiatric social worker, but I just decided I didn't want to do that. And then so we went back to Africa. And as a photographer, as a learning photographer, really, I took some courses from the University of PA or Virginia, and I did some correspondence course. But basically, I'm a self-learned photographer. I feel like photography is one thing that, one vocation that you can learn yourself through a lot of periodicals. Does that answer?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a pleasure seeing so many of you.
Hello?
Hi, Sharon. I mean, Esther.
Hello?
And Sharon.
Hello?
Hello,
No, this is Rebecca.
Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca.
Yes, hi. I'm trying to ask a question here
Yeah.
and also give you the same compliments, especially the soldier photographs were really good. Somebody asked about the interpreters. I was going to ask that, but I want to commend you for at least being part of those who document the marginal people, the nomads and the people torn by war and have nowhere to go, and the child soldiers. We don't really hear enough about them in the news, what happens to all these people. So this is great to have a visual record. And like you, I grew up with National Geographic. That influenced my photography somewhat to a degree. And then I lived in the Southwest. Those were beautiful. You absolutely captured the flavor from the Southwest, those famous locations. That was great. Quick question, what was that last canyon with the wall, not with the stripes, but the one with the very last photo with the curve in it? I'm just curious where that was.
It was in Escalante.
Oh, Escalante. Okay, I haven't been. That's one of them I hadn't been to, but I almost know them all by heart because I photographed them so much. But anyway, no. And then, okay, so I'm going to email you other questions so as not to take up the time, because there's a lot, including some more about the interpreters and your times of danger. When were you in danger in any of those places?
Danger?
Yes.
Well, from my book, people have said that we went from one danger and catastrophe to the next, but I didn't really feel that way, that we were in so much danger.
Really?
I mean, I was a lot younger, for one thing, and you know, you don't take things so seriously when you're
well, and then you mentioned a lot of different organizations and agencies, and again, this may take more time than we have, but were you ever with a group? I'm trying to just even quickly, you had mentioned All Africa Conference of Churches, and I don't know, different groups that you mentioned. Were you ever doing this with some of them along as the facilitators, you know, as guides or as people who do the documents and the paperwork for you? Did you ever do it that way, or?
We were always being hosted by someone. But I could give you a very long list of agencies that we work for. And
but I just meant along on the shoots. On the shoot themselves.
Not on the shoot, but different for different shoots.
Okay.
Although we did a project for Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center, for example, and that was sponsored by a whole list of European and American agencies. So the closest thing I came to having a constant, not employer, but was Camera Press in London. And then when I came back here, I've been with photo researchers in New York for many years. Although at one time I had 8 different agencies, but most of them have, the whole photo industry has collapsed, and
right. And I was going to ask about your conversion to digital. Do you have a favorite old school camera and a favorite new digital one, or do you just love one versus the other, or what would you say about your favorite cameras?
I don't really like to talk about my favorite cameras because any camera, be it, well, one of the top brands, it can be really good. It's
Uh-huh.
like what you get used to.
Uh-huh.
I had a motorcycle crash and crashed my Leicas and my Nikkor mat. And so I went to Hong Kong to buy new cameras. I did all this research before I went there. And I was going to buy a whole set of Canon cameras. But when I got to Hong Kong, I spent several days going around and handling different cameras. And then I ended up buying Minolta because it just really felt good
Mm-hmm.
in my hands. And I was probably the only corporate photographer in America who had Minolta cameras, but they made great pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how could you be a photographer without having a Nikon? Well, you know, I was somehow not in that frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I made great pictures, corporate pictures. So.
Right, and it certainly has a lot to do with who's using the camera, I understand.
I'll say it, I see your hand.
Yes, what would be your word of advice to the amateur photographer who wants to start as a photography and as a professional? What would be your word of advice for them? And this regards to my own daughter, that would be.
Take pictures. Sometimes I had assistants who I learned hadn't taken a picture for the last year. And I said, you can't be a photographer. If you're going to be a photographer, you can, how do you say, you cannot not take pictures. I mean, it's a passion. you have to have that passion. So my advice is take pictures, a lot of them. And you can have someone review them with you and improve as you go. But you've got to take pictures. I see David Nasario, my friend. Hi.
Hey, I have a question. What's up?
Oh, good.
It's good to see you. I really enjoyed all the photos, especially, well, I enjoyed all of them, but especially the ones in Africa and the ones that you took out west. My question is, what would be the top 3 or maybe the top 5 national parks that a person should visit out of all the ones that you've been to?
Price.
You know, the truth is that I haven't done very many. I mean, I went when our daughter Renee worked at Kings Canyon. We took a trip out there, and then again last year when we went out. But I haven't visited a lot of the parks, David. So I'm not sure if I'm good. I know one thing I really enjoyed, the ones that would be Bryce Canyon, Zion, Kings Canyon, and Escalante.
Okay, I'll go to those then.
Yeah. Well, Southern, you can't miss if you go to Southern Utah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
You can,
Yeah, Zion looks really cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I recommend something?
Sure, Rebecca.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yosemite.
Oh,
Ready?
Right.
Here's my list. Yosemite, Arches, Glacier, and Monument Valley. Put all those on your list too.
Yosemite, Archer,
It's late, but
Glacier.
like the man said, it's very hard to choose among them. I lived in the Southwest. They're all great. I lived very close to Canyon de Chelly and went down there in that canyon every single weekend. I know it
Nice.
inside and out. That's outstanding. Ansel Adams was there and did a famous view from the top in black and white. You could do it in sepia, black and white, color, anything you want. You can't go wrong in those canyons. So do go there and do get out there and walk around and see. And then there's also the wonderful ancient carvings the original native people did on the walls. Some of them are open to the public, some aren't. And so there's that as well as the natural beauty. So just bring your tent. You're going to want to stay.
Yeah, I'm down.
with
All right.
our with our Washington friends, the Yoders, and well, let's see, this was in uh, Vancouver. That was nice. And yeah, we saw a lot of Native American, original American art, which seems to have had a revival there. That was really great. But all that, Rebecca, all those that you mentioned, I haven't been to any of them. We have been to, we did stop at the park that has all the petrified rock.
Oh, petroglyph, yeah, petrified forest.
Yeah, yeah, in Arizona, I believe.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh. I've been there too, yeah. Mhm.
But hey, you don't have to go to the west. Visit PA state parks. Judy's just reminded me of that. I mean, I've made this state my country, and it's great. Pennsylvania is great. And the state parks are all closed now, but make your way out there.
That's a great, that is a super suggestion. Beautiful pictures that you did of those flowers.
Thank you.
May I ask, what was that last flower with the purple rays? Not the columbine, but that other, the last flower that had that very complex center to it. I've never seen that.
Do one of you know? I have it identified.
I believe it's a passion. It's the passion flower.
Flower.
Oh, okay.
Passion flower.
Thank you. I have photographed the passion flower, but not that exact angle, so I didn't recognize it.
That's where the passion fruit comes from.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, anything else, or what do you think, Greg? Should I say thanks and wrap this up?
Any
really been great.
any other questions?
I remembered you saying something about your work with the Amish. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yes. Actually, Ruth and I did 3 books on the Amish, and that was my first one. Well, I don't know what to say. I just really enjoy being there. You take some of the back roads in Lancaster County where there aren't any, where they're mostly Amish and there aren't any telephone lines or whatever, and you sit there beside the road. You can meditate, or it's just very, very pleasant. The Amish know how to do more with less. I wish I could talk Americans into doing more with less. That would be a very helpful way to come out of this coronavirus.
Yes.
So I don't know, I haven't done much photography there lately, but I think one of the publications you saw was of school children at an Amish school. That was through Ruth's father, who knew the teacher, and I showed up at the school and made some pictures of the children outside. And she came over and invited me to come in to the class, which was wonderful, because I don't think there are very many pictures of Amish classrooms.
I was going to ask that very question, is how you got permission to do that, because, or anything really other than pictures from behind. Did you have to ask and go through any permission to do that?
Some of the photographs are of church Amish who don't object to having their pictures made. Other ones, I just stood at the end of a field, and I don't know, when they came by, we waved at one another.
Yeah, I've done that too, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, some places they're much more, I mean, I don't like to, I have done this, but I don't like to sneak pictures of the armies. I like to let myself be out there and
Right.
so they can see me and they know what I'm doing.
Well, I'll conclude this if everyone is finished. Does anyone want to say one thing else? I would like to thank Blair tremendously. And Blair was supposed to do a live presentation when Corona struck, and we have many of his photos hanging still in our meeting house, and we had to cancel. But what can I say? This is so rich on Zoom. I would also like to say that if you would like to see all these photos in more detail, you can go to Blair's website, which is blairsites.com, and all his photos are there, and you can make contact with him directly. I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us. And next week, we have another special presentation by the scholars in residence at Haverford College. Jeremy and Nosy Rutledge are going to be talking about their foundation in Africa. And the presentation is called Embrace Dignity. But I don't know what to say to you, Blair. I would give you a hug if I was nearby. I just so enjoy being together.
You know, I would just like to acknowledge yet that two of the people who I'm seeing here were with us in Africa, and our daughters were like about the same age out there. Kerm Yoder, he's down there, and Bill Davidson. We both have daughters who were friends in Africa.
And I think your son-in-law is the director now at Pendle Hill, correct?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
From the Dominican Republic.
Well, thank you. Bless you all. It was wonderful.